Thank you. My name is Simon Gedda and I'm a grazier with a property in central Queensland where I've lived for 50 years. Over the last 3 years we've experienced a few record-breaking weather events, but the one I will touch on is the flood that hit us back in March in 2017. We had 1,000 millimetres of rain, that's 40 inches, in 14 hours on the headwaters of the creek that runs past our house and other infrastructure. The water came down with such ferocity that it washed away buildings, fences and yards, as well as ripping out old blue gums by the roots, and came into the second story of our 100-year-old high blocked home. It eclipsed the last record set in 1991 by 4.6 metres, that's 15 feet. By the time we realised the severity of it, we had 10 minutes to grab some stuff and head for the hills. Any scepticism I had about human involvement in the changing of the climate changed that day. I acknowledge that Suncorp is committed to and proud of its long history of supporting agribusiness. But agribusinesses like mine are under real threat from industries that should be the common enemy of an insurance company. Unconventional gas like coal seam and shale gas. Oil and gas expert Tim Forsey estimates that the carbon emissions from the proposed gas projects in the Beetaloo and Galilee basins will dwarf those of the Adani Carmichael coal mine. Why is it that Suncorp is still willing to back a sector that is putting so many of its own clients at risk of worsening weather and climate events?
Thank you, Mr. Gedda. Firstly, let me acknowledge I have visited customers in our Australian and New Zealand businesses who have been impacted by calamities, and I totally acknowledge the heart-wrenching experience, and I think it's important, particularly recently visited people in Townsville who are just recovering from the floods there. So the personal impact is not one that we take lightly at all. But you've asked me to talk about specifically climate change, which I will. Our policies, as I outlined in my opening address, ensure that our business practices are aligned with the Paris Agreement. We accept the international scientific consensus that our climate is changing, the Earth's temperature is increasing, and the extremely likely dominant cause is human activity. And we support the government's ratification of the Paris Agreement to act on climate change and reduce emissions to below 2005 levels before 2030 and keep global temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius. And whilst, as I said in my opening remarks, we have taken significant steps ourselves as a company to ensure that we're active and proactive on weather and climate matters, there is still more to be done, and we accept that. For our own part, we have governance processes in place. I outlined in my opening remarks the various formal policies we've adopted. We've actively been working on reducing our own environmental footprint over the last few years. We have reduced our exposure to fossil fuels. Fossil fuel activities now make up less than 0.05% of the insurance business and a negligible proportion of our lending portfolio. Suncorp does not finance fossil fuel projects. In investments, fossil fuel exposure is less than 0.5% of insurance and shareholder investment assets and less than 1.5% of total investment assets under management. We do not directly invest in, finance or underwrite new thermal coal mining projects or new thermal coal electricity generation. And we have a target of phasing out existing activities by 2025.